Disclaimer: my YouTube channel Facts and Opinions is for entertainment purposes only. While I strive to provide engaging and informative content, it should not be considered a sole or definitive source of information. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and subscribe. I'm Zach, and this is Facts and Opinions. Here's an Ethiopian proverb: when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. Here's some interesting geographical facts about Sudan. Sudan is located in northeastern Africa. This is what Sudan's 728,215 square miles looks like compared to the United States' 3.8 million square miles. Out of its 54 countries, Sudan is third largest in Africa by area. The word Sudan derives from the Arabic expression land of the blacks. Sudan is home to more pyramids than Egypt, containing over 200 in the city of Meroe. It is the center of the legendary ancient kingdom of Kush. From 1896 to 1899, the Anglo-Egyptian War, a part of the Mahadist War, was fought with Great Britain in Egypt against the Mahadist forces that occupied Sudan at the time. Let's get into the First Sudanese Civil War. It began in 1955, lasting till 1972. In 1956, Sudan became independent when Egypt and Great Britain granted it autonomy. Due to Anglo-Egyptian policies, it was divided into two separate territories, but only after they left. The division was also based on ethnicity and several differing beliefs. It is known as the Anyanya Rebellion, which translates to snake venom in the Maadi language of Africa. Joseph Lagu was the leader of the Anyanya Rebellion, and he played a significant role in the conflict because he helped unite various factions within Sudan at the time, and there were several differing and warring factions involved. The First Sudanese Civil War was fought between the predominantly Muslim northern central government against rebels in the south, where diverse ethnic and religious groups, to include Christianity and animism, fought for greater autonomy from northern governmental control. They also fought against North Sudan's Islamic government and imposition of the Arabic language, and they fought against Sharia law. The First Sudanese Civil War began as guerrilla warfare, originating from South Sudan, fighting against the North, the creation of the Anyanya, internal strife within the Anyanya, then to the creation of the Southern Sudan Liberation Movement, later known as Southern Sudan Liberation Front, and several other factions as well. The Southern Sudan Liberation Front supported South Sudan and strived for greater autonomy and self-determination from the central government of North Sudan, and they opposed central governmental policies like Arabization and Sharia law, much analogous to the Anyanya ideologies. The Addis Ababa Agreement ended the First Sudanese Civil War in 1972, albeit fighting only ended temporarily. It did grant autonomy to the South for roughly 11 years. It integrated Southern rebel forces into the central government's army, and it recognized cultural and religious diversity of the South, but all of this was to end in little over a decade. The agreement was focused on uniting the regions Bahar al-Ghazal, Equatoria, and the Upper Nile. About 1 million people died as a result of the First Sudanese Civil War. 4 million people were displaced into neighboring countries such as Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Now let's get on to the Second Sudanese Civil War. The Second Sudanese Civil War began in 1983 when President Ghaffar Nimri declared all of Sudan Islamic. This led to the creation of the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or the SPLA, which was another rebel group that fought against the Sudanese government. The SPLA was led by John Garang. The two major factions fighting at the time were the Central Sudanese government led by Omar al-Bashir, who also controlled the National Islamic Front, which forced policies upon South Sudanese people, and Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA, led by John Garang. The Second Sudanese Civil War originated in South Sudan, but ultimately it spread throughout the Nuba Mountains, which are located in the oil-rich land South Kordofan, roughly 300 miles southwest of Sudan's capital, Khartoum. The Second Sudanese Civil War also spread through the Blue Nile, a lake located in Ethiopia flowing about 900 miles from Ethiopia into Khartoum, Sudan's capital. The White Nile, which also flows through Khartoum, actually merges with the Blue Nile to create the Nile River. In 1995, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Uganda provided military assistance to the SPLA to fight against the Sudanese central government since they wished to weaken it due to the support for Islamic insurgent groups. By 1997, several warring factions within Sudan signed the Khartoum Peace Agreement with the NIF, with the goal of uniting various militia groups to include South Sudan Defense Forces and to incorporate peace among the SPLA. The South Sudan Defense Forces were a coalition of militia groups that opposed and fought against the central government, but they also fought against the SPLA, even though both of these groups opposed the central government. The Khartoum Peace Agreement led to a temporary reduction of military conflict between the central government and rebel forces. In 2003 and 2004, peace talks between central governmental powers in the South were making substantial progress. In January 2005, a comprehensive peace agreement was signed, and a few things included in it were the following: merging both sides of the conflict's army, Sharia law only applying to the North, the South being granted autonomy for only 6 years, which ultimately led to the South Sudanese independence referendum of 2011, and an evenly distributed amount of oil reserves between the central government and the SPLA. About 2 million people died as an outcome of the Second Sudanese Civil War, making it one of the deadliest conflicts post-World War II. About 4 million people were displaced into neighboring countries such as Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and some also sought refuge in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The current conflict in Sudan. It began on April 15, 2023, but we will begin in 2013 when Omar al-Bashir, a Sudanese military leader, recognized a violent and brutal militia known as Janjaweed as a rapid support forces and integrated it into the northern government. This allowed for him to leverage political and military strength. General Mohammed Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, was placed in command of the RSF. The Janjaweed is recognized for committing murder, rape, and torturing all en masse, and it is also responsible for the ethnic cleansing of South Sudanese communities and the destruction of over 3,000 villages. In 2018, protests against al-Bashir began, which was met with violent repression to include using live ammunition and tear gas, and this only fueled tensions. In 2019, two generals of al-Bashir's military usurped him, last names al-Burhan and Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, which ended Bashir's 3 decades of rule. Military and civilian leaders reached an agreement in 2019 during this transitional period. The government consisted of a sovereignty council which included military and civilian members that were appointed with the goal of leading the country towards democratic rule. But again, the situation escalated due to disagreements between the civilian powers and military powers. Civilians were recognized as a Forces and Freedom Coalition. General Abdel al-Burhan is currently in charge of the Central Sudanese military. In 2023, 3 main disagreements between these civilians and military powers were power sharing between civilian leaders and military leaders, transitional justice, like how to account for the crimes committed under al-Bashir plus how to punish his acolytes, and security sector reform. Civilians proposed it take 2 years for the RSF to transition as Sudan's official governmental military. The RSF disagreed and thought it should have at least a decade to transition. Currently, the ongoing conflict in Sudan has been labeled as the world's most severe humanitarian crisis, causing more than 8.6 million people to be displaced from their homes. It has led to the death of about 43,000 people since it began in 2023. The total death count from the first Sudanese Civil War to the current conflict now is upwards of 3 million people. My concluding remarks. Since the dawn of man, human beings have killed each other over differences that to us today may appear innocuous, such as the pigmentation of one's skin, the color of one's eyes, and the shape of one's face. From ancient hominids to Homo sapiens then, now to our contemporary societies, killing and going to war are behaviors indeed essentially instilled within our genome. It should be no surprise that anger is easier to unleash than to be antithetical to that emotion, since accessing those emotions at times increase our chances for survival hundreds of generations ago and still till today. Therefore, this is a part of our evolution. This is an ancient functionality ingrained so deeply within our human psyche that it would appear almost an evolutionary impossibility to escape, since we have been killing and destroying each other for hundreds, thousands, and millions of years, the last through a secular lens. I think this is why mental practices such as Stoicism exist, so that we may reason with a strong negative side. It should be less of a surprise then that some societies still accept killing as a means to solve disagreements, disputes, and disorder. America, for example, is quite the new place which a few hundred years ago did not seem possible to the majority of the world, and today, still for people in some countries it is unimaginable. I think the average person in Sudan could only dream of such a democratic rule as the one in the States. This is a reason why wars are being fought there and acts of genocide are commencing and assassinations are normalized. Contentions between the belief of absolute rule under Islam against the power of a democracy. The abolishment of Islam in South Sudan, seeking greater autonomy from central powers, and the ability to maintain their cultural identity are demands that the South is willing to fight, bleed, and die for. However, the ongoing killing in mass will continue at perpetuity as these issues are not resolved between the powers of Central and South Sudan. But what else could South Sudan do but disagree other than forcibly be united under Sharia law? It would be easy to say that religion is solely to blame for this. After all, Islamic law, especially under Sharia, allows for such atrocities to occur, even justifiably in fact. However, I think a key component is that psychopaths do amass much power in Sudan. Psychopaths are among us in every walk of life. When granted power in Sudan specifically, these people have the ability to commit atrocities out in the open. From an ostensibly innocuous farm boy as al-Bashir to then a brutal dictator as he became, this seems to be an ongoing and consistent part of Sudan's history, and not an isolated event. Whether these men were bred from military academies or were born into psychopathy or a bit of both, the fact remains that they will do anything in their power to maintain it, to include torture, pillaging, and cold-blooded murder. But I think they would do this regardless of religion. If not for the religion, I think perhaps they would instead kill over something in substitution for it, such as cultural differences and ethnic diversities. And this is exactly what they do. Men who amass such power and commit such crimes against humanity like genocide, I think do not believe in anything higher but thinking themselves a god. Of course, there are men who kill for the sake of Islam, and for the sake of every religion at that, but many people in Africa and especially the Middle East do agree with such a way of living, which I think is a learned lifestyle, which is based on killing people who disagree with them, and killing people for things completely out of another person's control, like where someone was born and what race they were born into. These ideologies are validated under Islam, especially if the one person person in question who was murdered happens to be an infidel. And so, some societies still commit such atrocities, but to them it is completely normal and an acceptable behavior. Their way of it being justified is due to religious beliefs, or at least the facade of one. I think people in such societies are manipulated at an early age into believing that murdering is okay so long as it is under a certain doctrine. They are indeed stuck in a sort of societal time capsule, and a part of it is attempting to breach the illusion that killing is normal, and it wishes to make themselves a society of civility. The opposing side has a stubborn heart and wishes to remain a society based on killing, torture, and destruction as a means to maintain absolute power under a single ruling fist. This is Facts and Opinions, and I'm Zach. Thank you for watching.